MN, the red-nosed Mustangs of the 4th Fighter Group, the blue-striped aircraft, the 357. I the Cupbane, a store of reinsold arm plating and decommissioned machine guns. Some have functioning World War II air radios alongside mon avions. The gauge authentique, to just the machine but the history or province. In 2014, the Mustang named Sierra Sioux Troop completed a 3-year restoration by Air Corps Aviation in Minnesota. The restoration team consulted that nearly every component of the aircraft is original to its 1940 full construction. The North Mike and factory in Guo. Only the engine mounts, ailerons and flaps be replete. It is for 3 the most original P-51 Mustang still foreign. Sierra Sioux 2 I served in the European theater in the 402nd Fadescoten toward the final months of war. After 1945, it was sold to Sweden, then to Nicaragua, then passed through civilian hands in America. Its restoration recreated the aircraft exactly as it appeared in April 1945. The aircraft under reserve Grand Chantin World War II Ward. At Golden Wrench Ward, the 2015 EAA Adventure Taskus. In May 2013, a pilot named Doug Matthews set a world altitude record for piston engine aircraft in a Mustang named the Rebel. He climbed to 42,568 feet of a Lake Okeechobee in Florida. The aircraft is nearly 70 years old at Bethorn, Florida. That record still stands today. Ed Maloney died on August 19, 2016. It was National Day of Dublin. In 1939, to honor the birthday of Orville Wright. Maloney had spent his entire adult life saving warbirds from destruction. His museum now holds more than 50 aircraft, many of them in flying condition. His sons and the children of his friends continue his work. His son-in-law, Steve Hinton, became one of the most celebrated warbird pilots in the world. Steve's son, Stephen Hinton, Jr., is a 7-time Reno Air Races Unlimited Gold champion. The legacy continues. The P-51 Mustang was designed in 102 days to meet an urgent British request in early 1940. The British Purchasing Commission had asked North American Aviation to build Curtiss P-40 fighters on the license. North American's president, Dutch Kindleberger, offered to design something better instead. The prototype flew in October 1940. It was supposed to be a stopgap until better fighters could be developed. Instead, it became the defining American fighter of World War II. The early Allison engine versions performed poorly at altitude. But when British engineers fitted a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine to a Mustang airframe, the aircraft was transformed. The Merlin-powered Mustang could fly higher, faster, and farther than any other American fighter. By late 1943, Mustangs World War II board all-weight Warbirds unbiked. They destroyed nearly 5,000 enemy aircraft in the air over Europe. They destroyed thousands more on the ground. It fought B-29 bombers to Tokyo in the final months of the Pacific War. After the fighting stopped, the Mustang reinvented itself again and again. Ground attack aircraft in Korea, Waikata in the Sinai, counterinsurgency fighter in the Philippines and Indonesia, in Central America, Pion racer over the Nevada Downed. Flying museum piece for generations that never knew the war. Machines are not supposed to outlive their purpose by 8 decades, but the Mustang has. It flies. Today, because people refuse to let it die. Preservationists like Ed Maloney, who rescued airframes from the scrapyard. Pilots who flew their obsolete fighters into combat one last time. Resort to fend youth rebuilding Rick into award-winning aircraft. Collectors who invest millions to keep Merlin engines turning. The factory in Inglewood closed long ago. The last new Mustang Rovers lying at 1945. Have found the engine, the hull, 12 cylinders at full power. Stu fills the fly over air shoes from California to New Zealand. That you happened to P-51 Mustang of Merlot 2. It became something more than ampling. It became a symbol there that refuses to end. If you found this story compelling, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each on methods. each one deserves to be remembered. We would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you were watching from. Our community spans from Texas to Tasmania. From veterans to history enthusiasts, you are part of our message mitts with American fighters at bargain prices. The Menoptre saw no feature for the propeller fighter. Jet across a future. The Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star died in 1944 and cut out on piston engine plane Odum flight. A new 840 forming around the war-warranted jets. The Mustang destined as captured. Then came Korea. North Korean bade South Korea on June 26, 1950. Within days, the Korean People's Army had pushed south across the 38th parallel with Soviet-built tanks and overwhelming numbers. The South Korean number collapsed. American forces stationed in Japan scrambled to Thorn. Minders discovered a serious problem almost immediately. The Dits were fast, but they could not stay over the battlefield long enough to support ground groups. The F-80 Shooting Star burned fuel so quickly that pilots barely had time to identify targets before turning back to base. The round trip from Japan to Korea consumed most of their fuel. They arrived at the battlefield that remained a later time. Worse, the early jets required long, paved runways. Us Korea airfields were short, wreathed, and cratered by artillery. That engines ingested debris and flamed out. The sleek new fighters were used for the four bases where Tarnfuses need the most. The Mustang had none of these problems. It could loiter over the battlefield for hours. It could operate from dirt strips that would destroy a jet engine. It could carry 1,000 pounds of bombs or rockets or napalm. And there were hundreds of them sitting in store to cut the United States waiting for the cutting torch. They forced to pull Mustangs out of mothballs. Then he had been relegated to air natural guard fields, or those fattened daddle stored of bales of what the Americans thought worst. Crews work around the clock to make them airworthy again. They loaded 145 Mustangs onto the aircraft carrier USS Boxer and shipped them across the Pacific. The Boxer departed Alameda, California on July 14th and arrived at Yokosuka, Japan just 8 days and 7 hours later. It was the fastest trans-Pacific crossed-in by an aircraft carrier in history. By late July, F-51 Mustangs were back in combat. The designation had changed. In June 1948, the new United States Air Force had replaced the P-51 Pursuit with F for fighter. Aircraft. The E-51 became the F-51. Under the new name, the Tang A-plane, the Warbird that had assigned Dengshai Berlin is now dying. North Korean changed. Lieutenant E. Helsect was a young American pilot with barely 200 hours of Mustang flight time when he found himself flying with the Republic of Korea Air Force in those desperate first weeks. He was part of a small group of American volunteer pilots serving as advisors and combat leaders for the ROKUTH. On July 10, 1950, Helsect was flying a mission toward Choen when he realized his radio had failed. At the same moment, he spotted 2 North Korean tanks en route below. He tried to alert the other pilots in his flight, but without a radio they could not hear him. Helsect made a decision. He broke from the formation dubbed attacked what the tanks. He strayed. Then, flying the road south, he found 9 trucks and a half track. He trucked those up too. When he Friday landed, his aircraft was nearly out of ammunition. After the mission, he barely landed at high dawn and spent 5 days whining hitchhiking back to Daegu. That was the kind of all the Mustang would fight in career. Close support, interdiction, ground attack. The romantic era of high-altitude dogfighting. The Mustang pilots were all hunting the fighters. They were carrying tanks and trucks as like convoys. This was Bukoloev work. They came with a terrible cost. The Mustang's liquid-cooled marine engine was a peculiar here. Not an air-cooled radial engine, which could absorb significant damage and keep running. The Merlin depended on a radiator filled with coolant. A single rifle bullet through that radiator and the engine overheat and seizing. There was no gliding to 30. Parts seconds to bail out or die. Edge Mood, the brilliant engineer who led the Mustang's design team in North American aviation, watched in first region for running. He'd later had the P-51 with a high-altitude fighter, It had been designed to escort bombers at 25,000 feet, where its supercharged Merlin engine could outperform anything in the sky. He said that flying it in ground support was almost a suicide mission because a .30 caliber bullet could rip a hole in the radiator and the engine would freeze up in 2 minutes. But the Air Force had made a catastrophic decision after World War II. They had scrapped their P-47 Thunderbolts. The Thunderbolt was heavier and slower than the Mustang, but it had a code rail engine that could take terrain's punishment. It was the perfect grand attack aircraft. A Navy got a Thor U says Thunderings. The Mustang the Air Force had. Some Thunder Untold. A statistics story. 335 F-51 Mustangs were lost in Korea during the war. 264 pilots were killed or went missing. Those losses under 72 fell to enemy ground fire. Just 10 were shot down by enemy jet fighters. The rest dying thence when missing the flame. The vulnerability was worse to winter. Korean winters brought brutal cold and frequent icing veils. The Mustangs were not equipped with icing sissings. Wing ice keenly to weapons law entities, and an overloaded aircraft that entered a store or spin almost never recovered. It was a virtual death sentence. On the ground, conditions were equally miserable. Shelter at Fort Base was pretty, pilot and mechanic led intense and unheated buildings. The brew crowed, drew some airmen to wake and tried to assist a using oil that 100-octane aviation fuel. The results were predictable. Fires and explosions killed men who had survived covered. Yet the Mustang performed its mission. It could reach targets the jets could not. It could stand station while the jets had to lead. It could operate from forward bases the jets would never touch. North Korean troops learned to fear that Merlin engine. They feared napalm most of all. Pilots from the 51st Fighting Interceptor Warbirds held a hybrid napalm mixture with thermite that drilled hot knots to nut the rugger right at Ted crude wheels. The punishing attacks forced North Korean forces to restrict troop movements to nighttime and to camouflage efforts to. Soldiers hid their vehicles under any available cover, sometimes driving tanks into houses or haystacks to escape the Mustangs circling overhead. The Royal Australian Air Force's No. 37 Squadron flew Mustangs in Korean from July 1950 through April 1951, when the crew to cross to Mihu depths. They suffered significant casualties during that period, before assisting other United Nations forces in hammering North Korean forces around Busan. The Australian Mustangs escorted American B-29 bombers raids in the airfields. The South African Air Force's No. 2 Squadron flew Mustangs to 1950 until they converted at 86 series. The Lethis 12 pilots killed in action, 30 missing. The South Africans flew as part of the United States 18th Fighter Bomber Wing and under reputation for professionalism under fire. The South Koreans flew Mustangs throughout the war. For them, it was not a matter of choice. They could not afford jets. The Mustang was their backbone fighter, flown by pilots who were fighting for the life of their country. Some Korean pilots, veterans of the Imperial Japanese Army and Heavy Air Service during World War II, and knew how to fly, and knew how to fight. They knew they might not come home. By 1953, the Mustang was finally being replaced by jet fighter bombers. The F-84 Thunderjet to the F-86 Sabre to overground jet duties. The light might F-51 passed to the South Korean Air Force and WWII. They, the air fighter on Markham Thumb, home the North Tomoka Air Force Mustang, F-51D assigned to the West Virginia Air National Guard's 167th Fighter Bomber Squadron, was finally withdrawn from service on January 27, 1957. It was retired to what was then called the Air Force Central Museum. But for a brief moment on May 6, 1957, it was reactivated to fly at the 50th anniversary of the Air Force aerial firepower demonstration at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. One final flight for the old warrior. But in other parts of the world, the Mustang was just getting started. In the summer of 1948, a fledgling nation called Israel was fighting for its survival. The British mandate passed in May. The state of Israel had declared independence, or the hours away from Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq invaded. The new country had no air force, its enemies through Spitfires and Harkins, aircraft supplied by Britain. Israel had a hodgepodge collection of light civilian aircraft written for military use, and on of Czechoslovak boot Messerschmitts who were barely airworthy. Israeli agents in the United States went looking for fighters. They found 4 P-51 Mustangs for sale. The program with the American post an arms embargo in the Middle East. President Harry Truman supported humanitarian aid to Israel, had built weapons sites. At Warri military aircraft were the Lear. Al Schwer, a New York-born flight engineer who would later found Israel Aerospace Industries, coordinated the purchase. He created something created. They created the Mustangs and labeled them as Combines by foot by International. No asked what kind of farm weighed 3 tons and keen airplane sheet crete. The first 2 Mustangs ride in for pound in 1948. Mechanics worked around the clock to assemble them at a makeshift airstrip hidden among orange orchards near Herzliya. In days the Mustangs were flying combat missions. They became the best fighters in the Israeli war, faster and longer range than the Arab armies kaput in the sky. With them long-range band in Tor Middle East, Mustangs were Torkurdsens Lear Grortatadesasher. They reached Waskers and Cairo, turned with a single tank fuel. No other Israeli fighter could match that capability. On November 20, 1940, while Azores Dively mosquitoes conducting cousins or Israel, he caught and find these missions with impunity, whose no Israeli fighter could reach found here. Earlier his attempts had failed. That day, Mac and Volunteer pilot Wayne Peake squabbled in a Mustang for Castilla Air Base. He gained altitude ASAP the Missile. He shot it down. It was a message. The skies over Israel now belonged to Israel. On January 5, 1949, 2 days before the final ceasefire toward independence, 2 Mustangs were escorting T-600 trainers pressed to Suez's grounded town aground. They encountered Egyptian fighters of the battlefield. In the bug site of wood, the Mustangs shut down Suez. It was the Mustangs' last air combat action of that war. Although the War of Independence ended in early 1949, the Mustangs continued to fly. Israeli pilots conducted reconnaissance missions over neighboring Arab states for years afterward. In April 1950, 4 Mustangs and 4 Spitfires attacked Syrian positions at Al-Hama after Syrian forces ambushed and killed 7 Israeli soldiers. In April 1954, when an Israeli Navy ship ran aground near Saudi Arabia, Mustangs flew cover for the rescue operation. When recovery became impossible, they bombed the ship to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. By mid-50s, the Israeli Air Force is acquiring jet freighters. Last meteors grand frist, then the Zult Aragon and Misters were frowned. The Mustang Osti Frodi I roll. Many were blade to storage. Only one squadron, number 116, remained operational, its primary mission its priming new pilots. Then came till 1956 and the Suez Crisis. Israel, France and Britain secretly agreed to attack Egypt after President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. The one quad for Israel to strike first, Bahrain and France at the pretext to intervene. Israelis pulled their Mustangs out to story. A second squadron was formed. Even their long range, the Mustangs were tasked with destroying Egyptian aircraft at distant airfields, some beyond the Suez Canal in mainland Africa. The Mustangs also received a special mission like anything they had quite ever attempted. On October 29th, during the free afternoon, 2 pairs of P-51 Mustangs raced westward across the Sinai Desert. They flew treetop level, so low that their propellers nearly touched the sand. Their mission was to cut Egyptian telephone lines using their wings. Israeli intelligence knew that Egyptian command and control the Pega land lines running through the desert. If those lines went down, Egyptian units would be able to coordinate their defense. Radio communication was unreliable. The telephone system was the nervous system of the Egyptian army. someone had designed a special device for the mission. It consisted of a weight connected by a cable to the aircraft's tail. The idea was to drag the weight through the teflon wires, sagging, severing them. But during the mission, all the devices failed. Paid to not aboard. The Sabre they threw low, used their wings and propeller blades to fly through the wires directly. At a vast Suez bravely. At the altitude may feet rather than hundreds of feet, a single statement is the death. A pulse of heat. Egyptian communications across the Sinai was severed, just as Israeli paratroopers dropped at the Metler Pass. Egyptian to meddlers suddenly found themselves unable to contact their forward units. The resulting confusion contributed to the rapid Israeli advance. The Mustang had found yet the use. It is no longer just a finder or var. Norway was a Y car. Israel kept his Mustangs and Zeros until January 15, 1931. By then, jets had completely taken over the frontline role. But the Mustang had proven self-adaptable beyond anyone's imagination. While the Mustang is fighting war in Asia and the Middle East, it was fighting a different kind of life in Mecca. After the war, surplus Mustangs attracted a new breed of pilot. Men who had flown them in conflict wanted the flying in rain, allow for full air racing had existed before the war. The Thompson Trophy race at Cleveland had drawn crowds of over 100,000 during the Great Depression. But those pre-war races used specially built aircraft, tiny machines designed for nothing but speed. After 1945, the races opened military surplus. Suddenly, ordinary civilians could buy fighters that had crossed the ground 50,000 odds for less than the price of a used gun. The Mustang was perfect for racing. It was fast in a straight line. It was relatively easy to fly compared to more temperamental fighters at the Corsair. And could not fight day. Races stripped with armor and armored safe way. They smoothed the airframe and filled every rivet for. They tweaked the Merlin engines for power. Forward the ray from the belly to the wingtips to reduce drag. Paul Mance won the Bendix Trophy cross-country race in 1946 flying a Mustang at 435 miles per hour. Jackie Cochran finished second in another Mustang at 420 miles per hour. In 1948, Mance won again, and Cochran finished third. The first three finishers' third year was separated by less than 3 miles per hour. It was the closest transcontinental race ever. The Thompson Trophy pylon races it. Cleveland showcased modified Mustangs, fine fees the Zayas never imagined. Modified Corsair Mustangs saw the course at 400 miles per hour, playing tremendous G-forces in the turns. But air racing is dangerous. In 1946, Tony Gianasso died when carbon monoxide leaked at the cockpit of his modified Corsair during the Thompson Trophy race. His aircraft crashed while the race continued around him. Hook Cleland won that year a record 396 miles per hour. Then came September 5, 1949, and Bill Owen's fatal crash. The deaths of Odum and the Laird family ended the Creeled races. Whereas rest while the residential neighborhood, the Thor entity administration ran around future races. Sponsors pulled out. From 1950 onward, surplus military aircraft were banned from competition. The Mustang races were granted. The airplanes that dominated the post-war racing scene sat in hangars and on tie-down lines, waiting for something that might not come. They would not fly competitively again for 15 years. In 1964, a boat racing champion named Bill Stead defiant revand air racing in the Fanta Desert near Reno. Stead was a showman and a businessman. He secured a contract with ABC Television's Wide World Sports. He conducted theons in nearby Reno. The air race would attract tourists. He found a toy park of Sky Ranch on plateau by 5,000 feet above Cheyenne, surrounded by mountains and far from any resident tornadoes. The Mustangs came into storm. Pilots who had their Warbirds life in the lean years suddenly dreamed to fly him again. A new generation of young pilots, too young to afford in the war, discovered the thrill of racing aircraft their fathers had run into combat. Modified Mustangs with names like Striga, Voodoo, and Dago Red became legends. Of Reno, they regularly exceed 450 miles per hour, faster than young Crichton of the flown during the war. The Reno races became the premier air racing event in the war, affording hundreds of thousands of sport days every timber. The racing scepter continues to this day. Mustangs are aim of the most competitive aircraft in their limited class. The competitions pushed modification beyond anything Iran desires imagined. Racing Mustangs range pacing over 3,000 horsepower. Doubles wartime rating. Some of collect wings a better roll rate. Every sub-stepped fuselages modified cooling systems. Some of these machines have been flying for 80 years. They have outlived their designers, their original pilots, and most of the nations they once served. Every year, Reno they proved that the Mustangs performed tabloid as no tip in fleet sport. But the racing circuit was only part of the story. In the 1950s and 60s, the P-51 made a frontline fighter in dozens of air forces around the world. The Philippines acquired over 100 Mustangs after World War II. They became the backbone of the post-war Philippine Army Air Corps, and later, the Philippine Air Force. Filipino pilots from Mustangs against colonists took insurgents during emergency the late 40s and early 50s. They used them moral rebels in southern Philippines. The Mustang was the first airboat of the Philippine Air Demonstration Team, formed in 1953 and named the Blue Diamond the following year. Indonesia acquired Mustangs from the departing Netherlands East Indies Air Force in 1949 and 50. Later, they received more from the United States. Indonesian Mustangs flew against numerous rebellions during the 50s, including CIA-backed Protester rebels in 1958. On May 18, 1958, Indonesia Mustangs soared. What remains the only confirmed aerial victory in the history of the Indonesian Air Force. Captain Ignatius Duanto was flying a P-51D. He encountered the B-26 Invader at the Malacanains near Ambon. The mate was being flown by Arn Lawrence Pope, an American CIA conflict pilot supporting the Protester rebellion, Duanto shorting there. Pope survived, with history, sentenced to death, and eventually released in 1962. Guatemala operated 30 Mustangs from 1954 into the early 1970s. 84 Mustangs then the rule present Paul Eugene Maglar for 1950 to 1956. The last Asian Mustangs were relied in 1973 with in South spare parts. Sweden pretuhu 16 Mustangs did AT-26. Some were modified for photo reconnaissance and designated as 26. These aircraft participated in secret Swedish mapping missions of Soviet military installations along the Baltic coast in 1946 and 47. The operation, codenamed FAN, involved deliberate violations of Soviet airfares. The Stanford outdive any Soviet fighter of that era, Sinai lost during these missions. The Chinese Nationalist Air Force flew Mustangs against the Communists during the Chinese Civil War. When the Nationalists retreated to Taiwan in 1949, their Mustangs went with them. The Communist Chinese captured 39 Mustangs left behind at the mainland. In October 1949, 9 of those Mustangs flew the military parade celebrating the thanking the People's Republic of China. Mao Zedong watched American-built fighters fly over the Haitian Communist markings. But the most remarkable Mustang operator was the Dominican Republic. The Fuerza Aérea Dominicana received its first Mustangs on September 9, 1948. The new aircraft were flown by Brazilian mercenaries, veterans of World War II, who reigned over 100 American guards in 1948 and 1950. Over the next 4 years, the Americans acquired Mustangs, including 32 ex-Swedish F-51DS, purchased in 1952 and 53. These Mustangs formed the backbone of Dominican air power for over 3 decades. They were among the most carefully painted fighters in the world, with bright skins and shark moth nosite, the way they look like aerial predators. Twinker Mustangs saw action during Constance's invasion of 1959, when Allies attempted to overthrow the Trujillo de Tijo. They flew again during the April Revolution of 1965, when civil war erupted and American forces intervened. During Operation Power Pack, the American intervention in the Dominican Republic, a Mustang shut down. It was the last Mustang ever destroyed in battle. The Dominicans began flying them. When their de Havilland Vintage gents wore out in the 1970s, were not replaced, the Mustangs became the only armed fighters in the Dominican inventory. The colorful paint schemes gave way to camouflage. The Chacmas remain. In 1983, a Cuban intelligence ship refused to leave the American waters despite repeated warnings. The Dominican Air Force was warning that its Mustangs. They strafed the ship until it departed. Cuba retaliated by sending MiG-21 jets to bar Dominican air bases. Marine pilots knew better than to fight supersonic ships with propeller fighters. One partly record, they went and eyed in hen the MiGs went white. The humiliation convinced the Dominican government to request American assistance. The United States eventually provide a 37 Dragonfly attack jets. A Dragonfly would take over the ground attack and counterinsurgency rule. The Dominican Mustangs were finally retired in 1984, 40 years after the aircraft's operation debut. 9 of the surviving aircraft were sold back to American collectors. They had outlasted every other Mustang operator in the world. But before the Dominicans retired their Mustangs, the aircraft had one war to fight. July 1969, the United States was about to land on the moon in the all-American jet that forward designed MiGs at Cybersonic speed. Vatongs and MiG-21s dude over the dome with radar-guided missiles. The Propeller fighter thing got into history. But in Central America, a different kind of war was brewing. El Salvador and Honduras had been in conflict for years over land rights and grain. El Salvador was more densely populated. Honduras was larger but sparsely central. Hundreds of thousands of Salvadorans had migrated to Honduras, seeking work on banana plantations and farmland. Honduran land afford to the 1960s just breathed many of these immigrants and sent them back to El Salvador, creating tensions that simmered for years. The fuse was lit during the 1970 World Cup qualifying series. El Salvador and Honduras were in the same group. The matches, played in June 1969, created riots in both countries. Fans fought in the stand. Violence spilled into the streets. After El Salvador won the 1990 3-2 on June 27th, El Salvador favored deploy coalitions with Honduras. On July 14, 1969, El Salvador invaded Honduras. Both nations fielded air forces from another era. Honduras threw F-4U Corsairs, a bent win height as World War II. A-17 Corsair in their inventory, a mix of F-4U-4, F-4U-5s. El Salvador Corsair of Iran, who build FG-1Ds, taught us more force of Cavalry Mustangs use. The Cavalry Mustangs were in-using aircraft. They were modernized P-51Ds, upgraded by the Cavalier Aircraft Corporation in Florida with improved engines, new avionics, and wing-cap fuel tanks for extended range. El Salvador purchased 5, plus 1 Jew control train, just the year before. The war effort was the last conflict in which piston-engine aircraft fought each other in aerial combat. The opening attack was almost conquer. A Southern C-47 transport, never designed as a bomber, flew the Honduran air base at Toncontin on the evening of July 14th. Kuman wrote 100-pound bonds at the WWII, trying to destroy Honduran part in open. A Mustaverson. The fighting quickly became serious. Both air forces put ground attack missions against each other's troops and Avazite. Mustangs and Corsairs thrifted and bombed with rockets, napalm, and machine gun fire. On July 17, 1969, Captain Fernando Soto, the Honduran Air Force, got his full mission the day. He flying F-4U-5 Corsair, armed with 20mm cangs. Its mission was ground attack, supporting Honduran troops fighting up the Salvador in vain. And Soto and his 2 wingmen put to combat on and weapons junk. One of his wingmen, Captain Zapata, reported that his cannons had jammed. Soto ordered Zapata to return to base. Zapata turned for home. As a fool 2 Salvador Cavalry Mustangs spotted him. They do to attack. Cepeda finds himself fighting for his life. The Mustangs were flown by Captains Douglas Varela and Liana Lovo. They cannot believe that luck. That Engla Honduran Corsair de Dandy de Vinzes, Ratten Schrumptothen. Varela lined up for a kill shot. Cepeda threw his aircraft into a desperate evasive maneuver. Varela 550 caliber machine gun. Immediate. Cepeda kept vain screaming thou on the radio. Soto horn. He and his main lingman Cupta Costa, Jettison their bond and do for a kill. Varela was Kulsa Raytown Cepeda, trying to line up another shot, when Soto came down behind him. Soto opened fire with his 20mm cans. The shells tore into the Mustang. Varela's aircraft went down. The thickened Mustang part, Lovo, tried to escape. Soto chased him down and destroyed him too. 2 kills in minutes. But Soto's now fanned down to the Dogfight Sudon Hosta continuing to in their rehomed area. They spotted 2,000 or an FG-1D Corsairs returning from a mission. Soto engaged. He shut down both of them. Fernando Soto scored 3 confirmed aerial victories that day. 1 Mustang, 2 Corsairs. They the last kills are made in combat between propelled fighters. His aircraft, F4U4 them to 609, is preserved in 8th Honduras amazing with 3 crow markings painted beneath the continent. The war ended the next day with a ceasefire brokered by the Organization of American States. Over 3,000 people died in those 100 hours. Tens of thousands more were displaced. But the conflict ended place in aviation industry. Corsair against Mustangs, Propeller against Propeller. The aerial battles of World War II, replayed one lifetime over the jungles of Central America. 24 years after the Great War ended. After 1969, the combat career of the P-51 Mustang was finally over. The aircraft refused to die. Number Ed Maloney, teenage white Mustangs being caught at Calero Field in 1945, and everything he vowed to save aircraft. I would Johnson squeak day and night. He ain't buying old Warbirds one at a time. Sometimes he traded Wycroft for hunting rare, more historically significant. On January 12, 1957, Maloney opened his collection to the public. It was the first aviation museum west of the Rockies. He displayed his aircraft wherever he could find space, moving several times over the. In 1970, Maloney partnered with a car collector named Jim Brucker to display aircraft alongside classic automobiles at an attraction called Movie World Cars of the Stars and Planes of Fame in Buena Park, California. The venture was short-lived, but the name Planes of Fame stuck. By 1973, Maloney had secured a permanent home at Chino Airport. It was the same location where he had watched the destruction almost 30 years earlier. The field where Calero had operated was now surrounded by civilian aviation. Volunteers flocked to help restore the aircraft to flying condition. Maloney was not alone. Across America, former pilots and mechanics were rescuing Mustangs from junkyards, foreign air forces, and storage fields. They tracked down aircraft in Guatemala and Nicaragua and the Dominican Republic. They rebuilt wrecks and crash sites around the world. They burnt 19 Merlin engines that Rolls-Royce have fought to use in decades earlier. The Warbird movement grew into a global phenomenon. Restoration shops specializing in World War II aircraft opened across the United States and in Britain and Australia and New Zealand. Parts suppliers tracked down written components and manufactured new ones toward specifications. In the 1960s, a restored P-51 Mustang might sell for $30,000. By the 1980s, that figure had climbed over $1,000. Today, an airworthy P-51 commands prices between $2 and $4 million. Historic examples would document the combat records of more than 5 million. There are now over 160 airworthy Mustangs worldwide, with over 200 in the United States in the FAA registry. Most of them feel fine. They appear to choose from Eichkreis bis twins into Anker Museum. There is at Reno, Diftar and Films. Tom Cruise owns one and flies it himself. His Mustang appeared in Top Gun Maverick in 2022. The aircraft carry the names of the men who flew in combat. Names like Kreitzer Mighty and Ser Su 2 and Man O' War. The paint schemes reproduce the markings of fighter crews that existed 8 decades ago. A Checkatal Klein of the Tuskegee Airmen, the red-nosed Mustangs of the 4th Fighter Group, the blue-striped aircraft of the 357. Inside the coupe, restorers of reinstalled armor plating and decommissioned machine guns. Some have functional World War II era radios, arms Admon avions. The goals authenticity to preserve not just the machine but the history of the Earth. In 2014, a Mustang AIM Sierra Sioux Troop completed a 3-year restoration by Air Corps Aviation in Minnesota. The restoration team found that nearly every component of the aircraft was original to its 1944 construction at the North American factory in Goa, California. Only the engine mounts, ailerons, and flaps have been replaced. 8th and 3 demersed original P-51 Mustangs to 4. Sierra Sioux 2 I shortened the European Feta in the 402nd Fighter Squadron during the final months of the war. After 1945, it was sold to Sweden, then to Nicaragua, then passed through civilian hands in America. Its restoration recreated the aircraft exactly as it appeared in April 1945. The aircraft earned reserved brand chanting World War II at a Golden Wrench Award at the 2015 EAA Adventure Oscars. In May 2013, a pilot named Doug Matthews set a world altitude record for piston engine aircraft in a Mustang named the Rebel. He climbed to 42,568 feet of a Lake Okeechobee in Florida. The aircraft is nearly 70 years old at Hawthorne, Florida. That record still stands today. Ed Maloney died on August 19, 2016. His National Aviation Day established in 1939 to honor the birthday of Orville Wright. Maloney had spent his entire adult life saving warbirds from destruction. His museum now holds more than 50 aircraft, many of them in flying condition. His sons and the children of his friends continue his work. His son-in-law, Steve Hinton, became one of the last celebrated warbird pilots in the war. Steve's son, Stephen Hinton Jr., is a 7-time Reno Air Races Unlimited Gold champion. The legacy continues. The P-51 Mustang was designed in 102 days to meet an urgent British request in early 1940. The British Purchasing Commission had asked North American Aviation to build Curtiss P-40 fighters on the license. North American's president, Dutch Kindleberger, offered to design something better instead. The prototype flew in October 1940. It was supposed to be a stopgap until better fighters could be developed. Instead, it became the defining American fighter of World War II. The early Allison engine versions performed poorly at altitude, but when British engineers hit a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine to a Mustang airframe, the aircraft was transformed. The Merlin-powered Mustang could fly higher, faster, and farther than any other American fighter. By late 1943, Western's World War II wars rolled away to Waterloo and back. They destroyed nearly 5,000 enemy aircraft in the air over Europe. They destroyed thousands more on the ground. They thwarted B-29 bombers to Tokyo in the final months of the Pacific War. After the fighting stopped, the Mustang revenged itself again and again. Ground attack aircraft in Korea, Waikata in the Sinai, counterinsurgency fighter in the Philippines and Indonesia, in Central America, pylon racer over the Nevada Dead. Flying museum piece for generations that never knew the war. Machines are not supposed to outlive their purpose by 8 decades, but the Mustang has. It flies. Today, because people refuse to let it fly. Preservationists like Ed Maloney, who rescued airframes from the scrapyard. Pilots who flew their obsolete fighters into combat one last time. Resource who spend years rebuilding wrecks into award-winning aircraft. Collectors who invest millions to keep Merlin engines turning. The factory in Goa had closed long ago. The last new Mustang rode off a line in 1945. The sound of the engine, the howl of 12 cylinders at full power, still fills the thigh over airshows from California to New Zealand. But it will happen to P-51 Mustang of Merlin too. It became something more than airplane. It became a thin-building air that refuses to end. If you found this story compelling, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories, each unmethods, each one history remembered. And we would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from. Our community spans from Texas to Tasmania. For veterans to history enthusiasts, you are part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.